My name is Sandra Stanley. This is Friday, January 13th, 2023. The time is around 10:30 a.m. I am interviewing Ms. Thelma Byers Bailey. This recording is taking place in the University Library in Charlotte, North Carolina. The purpose of this interview is threefold. One, to preserve the primary source historical information about Princeville School and the town of Princeville from a personal recollection. Two, to supplement information that has been researched and collected for the Princeville School Research Project. And three, to obtain primary source information about Mr. Walter G. Byers, former Princeville School principal, 1936 through 1938. Are you ready, Ms. Bailey? Okay, good morning, and thank you for interviewing with me.
I'm delighted to do so.
Thank you. Let me start off. Please give me your full name.
My full name is Thelma Ann Byers Bailey.
And your age only if you're willing to share that information.
89.
You look wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Where do you live, Ms. Bailey?
I live in the family residence that my father had built for my mother and me.
Ms. Bailey, where did you go to school? Tell me about elementary, high school, and college.
Okay. I went to Biddleville Elementary School, which CMS decided to tear down. And I went to Northwest Junior High. Elementary school was 1 through 6 during those years.
Okay.
Middle school or junior high was 6 through 9. I went to Northwest Junior High, which was the old West Charlotte, the original West Charlotte. And then I went to West Charlotte Senior High, 10 through 12, the senior drive campus.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to Fisk University from 61 to 65. And then from there, I went to St. Louis University Law School in the 70s.
Okay.
And I also did a master's joint degree program at St. Louis.
Okay, sounds good. And Miss Bailey, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Charlotte.
Okay. And you told me you were born where?
I was born in Wilson.
Okay.
But my mother is from Wilson. My father and father were living in Rocky Mount. And then when Dad got the position at Fairview in Charlotte, we moved to Charlotte. But I was still in diapers. So I don't remember living anywhere other than Charlotte.
Okay. And do you have siblings?
No, I do not. I had one sister, 2 years younger than me, who died after 3 hours.
Okay. And who are your parents, Miss Bailey?
My father is Walter G. Byers, and my mother is Thelma Lucille Barnes Byers.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
They were both educators. My father was a principal. And by the time I knew him, he was a principal at Fairview Elementary School in Charlotte, North Carolina. My mother was staying at home until I was school age, and then she went back to work at Gaston Highland High School in Gastonia.
Yes. Okay. Did either of your parents ever talk about their work that they did, and if so, what did they say about being educators?
They talked about it all the time, to my nausea. No, Dad talked about the students at Fairview. He really loved those kids. It was like I almost felt like I had competition for his attention with the students at Fairview. Mama was a home economics teacher, so she taught in high school, and so she would tell me about the kids and what they were making at school or what they were cooking at school. I was another one of her students, basically. She started teaching me how to cook and how to sew. I mean, my dolls had the most fabulous wardrobe that you could ever see because I started sewing. I had this tiny little Singer sewing machine that you ran it by turning the little wheel on the side. We still have it, by the way. It never did work, but I made my dolls' clothes.
So you learned to sew too.
Oh, I started sewing at 5.
Wonderful.
I didn't start sewing my own clothes until I was in the 5th grade.
And I was going to ask you, did you still have the little sewing machine?
We do. It's one of my grandchildren have it.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up in your household.
Growing up in my household, because from the time we moved to Charlotte until now, we've always lived in the same neighborhood. So growing up in my household was the same as growing up in Lincoln Heights. I will tell almost anybody, I'm the child that Lincoln Heights raised. Everybody, when they moved in, they were busy moving in the house. I decided to introduce myself to the neighborhood. And I would go knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm Peach Byers," and walk past whoever's standing there at the door and start meandering through their house, looking in their refrigerator, whatever. The whole neighborhood belonged to me. It's my world, y'all live in it.
Yeah.
But I was embraced by every person on the street, on St. Mark Street, and they all were my family. And Mama got to the point where there was a bottle of mine in every refrigerator, all of both sides of the street. Whenever I got tired of eating Mama's cooking, I wanted to go eat at McQueen's house because there were no children on my block. So all the adults were my family. And when I would want to go eat, Miss McQueen would be cooking something and I would want to stay at her house and eat. And so she would tell Mama, "She's eating here. Send the food, what you were planning to feed her for dinner, send it down. I will feed her. She can eat with us." I never noticed that I was eating something different from them. I thought I was in the family. I was eating what Miss McQueen cooked. And I was happy. And Mama was happy I ate because I was going to give her a fit because I wanted to be there instead of here.
So that was the village concept. The village raised
me. I mean, that was it.
Wonderful. Sounds like a good childhood to me.
It was.
What was important in your household? What was important to your mother?
What was important to my mother is if you walk through the kitchen, wash your hands. My dad and I would tease her. We called her Nice Nest because she always made us wash our hands. She was a germophobia. I don't know how you would say germaphobe. Yeah. Because of her education and because she went through the Virginia State Teachers College and her major was home ec, she had all of that educational knowledge about how to prepare foods safely, how to, manage a home healthily. And so she was just doing at home what she was teaching her students to do in class.
What about your father? What was important to him?
What was important to Dad? Golf, bridge, kids. The kids were, and I gave it in reverse order. The kids were the most important to him, especially his boys. As I became more aware of who he was and how he functioned, I realized, he'd have probably been happier if I was a boy. But it didn't matter. Since I was a tomboy, it didn't matter. I was up trees, anything he did, I would be right behind him trying to do it too, especially when I was younger. I got to the point where whenever he was doing something energetic, I would go around.
What did you choose as a career?
Well, it migrated. I had always, from the time I was 5 years old, I had wanted to be a pediatrician. And it was basically because my sister had died when she was 3 hours old, because they did not know how to deal with RH factor at that point, back in the 40s. And I had so missed having a sibling. That was one of the things that I felt my entire life, was I did not like being an only child. I used to beg my parents to have another one. I want a playmate. There's nobody in the neighborhood but me. I got all these adults, but I don't have anybody to play with. And I didn't understand RH factor.
Yes.
By the time I understood it and understood they couldn't have a child, another one, because at that point they figured there's no point. The child's going to die. I decided, well, I'm going to be a pediatrician, so no other child has to suffer being an only child the way I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept that philosophy all the way up through high school. I just knew I was going to, and I had charted out what colleges I was going to go to, because I wanted to go to Meharry Medical College. So how do I get to Meharry? Well, I was going to go to Howard, and then I was going to go to Meharry, because I didn't know about any other really good Black universities other than Howard. So it's a two-part there. I went to the summer before my senior year. We traveled. My father was in the NEA, and so we had traveled to Portland for an NEA conference the summer of my 7th grade. And the summer before my senior year in high school, we traveled to Los Angeles. And so he was at these NEA conferences, and Mama was having fun with the adults, and I was playing with the kids, the high school kids in Los Angeles. Everybody out there was talking about Fisk, and I'd never heard of Fisk. Now, I did not know my aunt was a graduate of Fisk. She was a music major. My mother's sister, her mama was the baby, and her sister was the oldest, and I think she was. But anyway, she had two siblings, but her sister had gone to Fisk. So we had a Fisk connection, but nobody had ever talked to me about college, because everybody assumed I was going to go to Howard. It was just a given. But then I went out there and I'm going, why is everybody out here talking about Fisk? And I never heard about Fisk. So I came back, found out my favorite teacher was a Fisk graduate. He was the primary source of all the growth that I had done in math and science. He never talked about Fisk. And I'm going, well, so my godparents taught from DC, and they had, I think they were, I don't know if they were with Howard. It was Whitehead, Dr. Whitehead. He was on the board of trustees at Johnson C. Smith, but the Whiteheads were old family friends from Wilson. In fact, his wife's name was Thelma, and Mama's Thelma. Mama was their godmother. She was one of my godmothers. So they asked him, well, can she get as good an education as Fisk as she does at Howard? He said, yeah. Howard's a bigger school, but the quality of education, if she applies herself, will be exactly the same. And you go to Fisk, you can automatically go to Meharry if you want to. That's just the relationship they have. And so I said, oh, well, that fits right into my ultimate goal, which was to go to Meharry to be a pediatrician. So I'll go to Fisk. Wonderful. So I applied. Of course, I got accepted because I'm smart. Mr. Piles had decided was my math and science teacher. And he had decided that he was going to make all of us take AP courses. And AP tests weren't offered in Black schools. But he decided, well, you don't have to take the course, I'm just going to teach you. So we'd have to stay on Friday nights after school. He would make us come back to the science lab on Saturday morning, and he would drill us for 4 hours. And then on Sunday afternoon, he had us in his kitchen. He was drilling us on how to take this AP test. So by the time we went through this whole thing for a year, I took the AP test, I did well. So when I was at Fisk, when I arrived and took all the entrance exams, of course, I passed them all. And so my major was math, and my minor was going to be physics. just because those were the two courses he taught me very well in. Although I did well in biology too. And I did so well that in my freshman year, I was in the classes with the juniors and the seniors in math. And I was taking physics at the same time. By the time I finished my sophomore year, I had finished my math major. And unfortunately, my counselor was the chair of the physics department. He said, "Oh, well, if you finish that, you want what else?" I said, "So what am I going to do now?" He said, "How about you switch your major from math to physics?" I said, "Well, I took the physics courses you got already. Okay, fine." So that's how I ended up with a double major. Because, but in the interim, happened to fall in love with somebody who was at Meharry. And he was graduating from Meharry at the same time I was graduating from Fisk. So we got married my junior year, which ended my opportunity to go to Meharry for medical school, because he was off running to internships, and then we were overseas, and so that ended that. But how I ended up in law was the summer we got married was I had an externship at IBM in Poughkeepsie. He had an externship at Harlem Hospital in New York. Mm-hmm. So we got married in June and went to New York for our summer externships. My aunt lived in Brooklyn, her mother's sister. So I would go to Poughkeepsie and he would be at Harlem, and then I'd come down on weekends and we'd go stay at my aunt's house, and then we'd go back to our job. That's how we spent our summers, the summer after we got married, before we set up housekeeping in Nashville for our senior year. And then we were off to St. Louis, where he did his internship at Homer G. Phillips, and that's where my son was born. And after that, by that time he'd also, this summer, just before we got married, he accepted some kind of relationship with the Air Force, where he was on active duty his senior year. So that was the income we lived on, was his military income. Mm-hmm. And then once he graduated, and once he finished his internship, then they assigned us to Bentwaters, England. And we spent 3 years in England, and that's where my daughter was born. Before we finished that, we came back, he was assigned to Travis Air Force Base, where he did his residency. And that was the first place I really had a job. And I decided I was looking around, I was applying for jobs all over the Northern California area. We were living on Travis Air Force Base. And while I was waiting to find something, I decided to substitute teach. And of course, math being my favorite subject, math substitutes were hard to find. I was being called regularly.
You were in demand.
I was in demand. And I had gotten to a point where I was teaching 6th grade math in this little high school in Fairfield, California. And the teacher had become pregnant and was going on her maternity leave, and they wanted me to be a long-term sub. And they were really basically trying to get me to come on and finish, because that was backup. Daddy had always said, "Yeah, I know you want to be a doctor and all of that, but you're going to have a backup." So one summer he made me take education courses at Johnson C. Smith. So I had all the coursework necessary to be a teacher. Only thing I hadn't done was my practice teaching. And so they were saying, "We can take care of that. We're gonna sign you up for practice teaching, and by the time you finish off this year while this other lady's on maternity leave, we'll have you ready so we can hire you as a full-time teacher." I had fun with the kids. The kids had fun with me. That was one of the things. They knew the kids were learning. The kids were excited about learning. The problem is I have no classroom management skills. Nobody ever bothered to tell me how to manage. I could teach them, but I'd get excited. They'd get excited. We both get loud. So You would want to put my class at the very end of the hall because we would be loud. They were learning, and we were excited, and we would jump around. Well, who did that? What did that? You know. But yeah, I loved it. They loved it, but they were driving me crazy. So the state of California decided, oh, by the way, we'd like to have you come work for us. And I said, oh, thank Jesus. So I didn't finish any of the practice teaching or any of that. I went to work for the state of California, and I did data processing for 3 years, and ended up for the Department of Justice, Criminal Justice Information Systems in the state of California. They were automating their data system, and we were creating the software so that they could keep track of all the people that they needed to keep track of, find out where they were and all that. And we were tied into the national system. And so I did all of that for 3 years until he finished his internship, his residency. And so after that, we moved to, while I was doing that, one of my co-workers was also going to law school at night, and he was observing how my programs almost always ran the first time. And he said, you really would make a good lawyer because of the way you approach problems logically, the same thought processes that you do working these programs, the same processes that you would make you a good attorney. I'm going, why would I want to be a lawyer? He said, just take the test. Don't worry about it, and then we'll talk. Well, I took the test, the LSAT. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of some of the skills Mr. Powers had taught me in terms of test taking when I was in high school. And I was having fun. No, I don't think anybody, if maybe they've changed the test now, but nobody would tell you that they took the LSAT and had fun. Because I was looking at, okay, you're trying to trick me. I know that that's not right. And I was arguing with the test. And I did that. And I came out and I did really well on the test. And so I said, well, okay, I did well on the test. That was pretty fun. So I applied. We knew he was going to be stationed at Scott Air Force Base next. So I applied to 2 law schools in St. Louis, which was St. Louis U and Washington U. And they both accepted me, and they both offered me scholarships. St. Louis U offered me a 3-year full tuition scholarship. Washington U offered me a full 1 year renewable scholarship. I said, I'll take the 3 years. So that's how I ended up in Washington, at St. Louis U Law School. Wonderful. With my full tuition.
Yeah, it was a kind of a convoluted journey to get there, though.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So what did your parents think about your career choice?
That's what you want to do, go for it. Dad was disappointed that I didn't follow through on teaching. Mm-hmm. And his comment was, you cut your teeth on the age group that is the hardest to deal with, which is sixth graders, middle school. They are more rambunctious, they're harder to control, and they're just beginning to feel their oats. And so between me getting them excited and their hormones getting them excited, we were aggravating the school and they were aggravating me. So he was disappointed that I hadn't followed through on education.
But did they get a chance to see your success as an attorney?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, when I passed the California bar, which is one of the 2 hardest bars to pass in the country, it's North Carolina and California. I passed that, and the grades came out in October and November. Everybody else was getting sworn in, but I had to wait until December till Mom and Dad could come out to witness my being sworn in as an attorney.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about your parents. Tell me a little bit about your mother.
Mom is a quiet soul until she puts her foot down. Once she puts her foot down on a decision, that's the end of this conversation. So she kind of rules the roost in that respect. She lets him rule until, and then the foot goes down, end of conversation. That's the decision.
Okay. What about your father? Tell me a little bit about him. Was his personality like?
He's a jokester. He loves playing jokes. When you sit down to dinner with them, you may as well just sit, be quiet and watch because the show is on. They enjoy each other's company so much. They were just banter back and forth. They laughed at each other's jokes. They just had a good time. But he was a jokester. If I was sitting in the front seat with him and driving, I'd be sitting there and all of a sudden his hand down on my leg. just anything just to play with you.
Did your father ever tell you about his life growing up or where he was brought up?
Not really. I know a lot about my mother's family but he took me to South Carolina. I remember once I was in elementary school, and he was saying, "This is where I grew up." And I remember sitting on a porch playing checkers with somebody who was a cousin of mine. I don't know what cousin. I don't know if I ever met him again. But we were playing checkers, and I beat him. And I'm going, I thought you were supposed to be the big. But checkers we all played board games. Mom and I loved working puzzles. I mean, we did puzzles, we played checkers, we played Monopoly, all the board games had my children grew up with the board games that I grew up with. All the puzzles and all of the Chinese checkers. What I did not play was chess. And I was not introduced to that as a child, and I didn't particularly never have had an interest in that particular game.
So you were an only child, but you were not bored.
There was no point in being bored because they were going to find something for me to do.
Miss Bailey, did you know that your father was a former principal of Princeville Graded School? Had you ever heard that?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. I knew about him being a principal at O.R. Pope.
Yes.
Because every summer
in Rocky Mount.
I never had a chance to have any holiday in Charlotte until I was in high school, because everything centered around Wilson and Rocky Mount for every holiday. You had to go to Wilson in Rocky Mount for Easter. You went there for Thanksgiving. You went there for Christmas. And I spent all the summers in Wilson and Rocky Mount because that's when Mom and Dad would go to Columbia to do their education, have their higher education after college. And so I spent summers either in Wilson or Rocky Mount, mostly Rocky Mount, and in New York with my aunt in Brooklyn and in Harlem.
Okay. Was your father involved in the community?
He probably was, but I wasn't paying any attention.
Okay. And do you know of any successes or achievements that he had professionally as being an educator or civic or otherwise?
I knew about him being elected as the first Black in the NEA. I think that was when I was in middle school. Well, we called it middle school. It was junior high then. I wasn't aware of any of his activities when I was growing up politically. He would when I was little, he would leave the house at night and go to meetings. And I'd be at the door kicking and screaming because I didn't want him to leave. But it really was, I wanted him to take me with him. That wasn't going to happen. But I didn't want him to leave. I wanted him to stay home and play. But I didn't know where he was going or what he was doing. He was probably being social because he loved to play bridge. He loved to play golf. And he was in other social groups. Mama was also, they both were very social people.
Okay.
She was in the links and the sororities, and he was in his fraternity. So they were going places.
Okay. Tell me, how did your childhood and the people that you were close to, does that impact your present life, how you live now?
The people that I grew up with, it's amazing. People are amazed that my friends that I grew up with from the time I was 3 or 4 or 5 are still my friends today. We still live here in Charlotte. I mean, it's not that we stayed here in Charlotte, because all of us spread out after high school. It's like everybody left, but we all came back home, and so we are still here. My best friend in high school, she was my maid of honor at my wedding. She's still my best friend. She lives right down the street from me. I live in the same house. She lives practically in the same house. And as we get older and some of our friends start leaving us, we're feeling we feel diminished, because the people we wanted to grow old with aren't here.
Yes, I get that. What are you doing now that's important to you?
Well, I started I came home in '94 because Dad had developed Alzheimer's, and Mama had been trying to deal with it. And it had gotten to the point she didn't understand the disease and she didn't know how to cope. And my daughter had been going to the Air Force Academy and was in the Air Force. And she was then assigned overseas to Korea. And so we told her that before you leave, you need to go visit your grandparents, because you're going to be over there for 3 years and they are old, and we don't want you to have to come back if something happens to anybody. So she went to my parents first, and because she was living in Ohio at that point. So she wrote back saying, she called me, I don't know, Mama, you got to go home. Things are not well. Grandma cannot handle. And, she just gave this long litany of why things were going south really quickly. And the neighbors were trying to help as best they could. But Mama couldn't cope with Dad. Dad was all over the place. He got out the house one night. She didn't even know he was out. He walked up the street to the post office. He go over to the library, and at 2 a.m. he was back home, banging on the door, trying to get in, and she didn't. The neighbor next door had to call her on the phone to tell her to let him in. She didn't even know he was out of the house. He was one of those who walks. He was hard for me to keep up with. So, it was time for me to come home. And so I did come home in '94 primarily to help take care of him. And he passed in '95. But in that process, I was able to help her understand how you handle a person and what kind of medications are available. She did none of that. All she knew was she wanted him to stay at home. She was not willing to put him in a nursing home. And I'm in agreement with that. I think they do best when they age in place, and stay in familiar settings. And so, but I was able to help her. Her church. There's a whole lot of history here. When they got married, she was a Methodist, he was a Baptist, and those two was like oil and water. I grew up. Daddy went to this church, Mama went to that church. So I went to church with Mama. And I loved the church where I was going with Mama. This was when I was a toddler. And I particularly loved the preacher. I just thought he was just the best. And this is another church where I'm the baby, but I ruled. Yeah. The preacher and the choir would march in, and I'd walk in with the preacher looking up at him. And then Mama would have to grab me out of the choir, out of the thing, and sit with her. When he came down, I got back in and I walked back up, and I just thought he was the moon. He passed when I was 5. I couldn't handle it. So I couldn't go back to that church. So I went to church with Dad from that point on. And Mama stayed in the Methodist church. He stayed in the Baptist church. And I grew up in the Baptist church with my dad. He was over the moon with that, you know. Now he had control of me. Oh, me. But anyway, but after I left, Mama fell out with the preacher. He said something, or his wife said something. Anyway, she left. She would left the Methodist church, and then she visited for years and years and years and years. And finally, she fell in love with Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. Dad was at First Baptist West, and so she and I were communicating. And she said, "Is this a good church?" And I told her I had visited back and forth, and I said, "Yes, Mama, that's a good church." And so he said that if you are going to join a Baptist church, and I don't care what Baptist, but if you're willing to change to a Baptist church, I will move my membership to wherever you go. Well, First Baptist West about had a fit, because he was the superintendent of their Sunday school, and he's always been involved in Sunday schools. When I was in high school, I was teaching Sunday school. That was one of the things I did in the Baptist church. But this was also when he was aware that he was losing it mentally. And it was a real strain on him to sound professional in his church, in his leadership roles in the church. And so he was grateful for the fact that he was able to change to a different church and not have leadership responsibilities, because First Baptist so loved him. They just could not fathom losing him and losing his leadership capacity. You know, they honored him that way. And they didn't care. They didn't care that he was losing, and I'm sure they realized it, but it didn't matter to them. But so they really were upset when he moved his membership to Friendship. But when I came home, they were members of Friendship. Mama was a Methodist. They believed in sprinkling. Mm-hmm. So when Baptist told her she had to dunk, and she was afraid of water. She was deathly afraid of water. So he dunked her, and she got her coat and went home. But she let him dunk her, because they all said, "I got to dunk, I'll dunk." But she really liked the church there, and they embraced both of them, because a lot of their friends were at Friendship, just like a lot of their friends were at First Baptist West. Mm-hmm. So when I came home, and Pastor Jones had decided to have this long one-day seminar on Alzheimer's, because so many of his members were of an elderly age, the same age group as my parents, and their families were struggling with this disease, and they didn't know how to cope. So, and they were saying, and if you have a family member with you, we want you to come and learn about the disease. We'll take care of your family member while you're in this all-day class. So Mama and I signed up for it, and they took care of Dad while we were doing it. And after that, they explained to her why she needed to not put him in a nursing home, but just put him in a daycare so that you can get some relief. Because it was me that was going to get the relief. But she had struggled trying to take care of himself, so she knew that, you know, how traumatizing it was for the caregiver. So after that, she was willing to allow me to find a daycare facility for him. Well, the first daycare facility that we found was being conducted in McCrory Y. And so he was there. One of his former teachers was, several of his staff members were there. And so he thought he was back in school. It was hysterical. Because if he managed to get out that door, then he saw his kids running up and down the hall, and he was trying to tell them to go back to their class and to stop running. And if he really got away from me, he would do the same thing to me. he would come to the door and he would say, okay, now where's your lesson plans? And what did you teach today? It got to the point, he was so aggravating, I had to put a lock on my door just so I could have some peace in my own bedroom without being interrogated about my classwork. But he was doing the same thing to the staff at the bar. And it didn't help that two of his staff were also in there for Alzheimer's. You could not have convinced him he wasn't back at work. But he was really funny. He just and if you didn't want to play his game, then he was like, oh goodness, where did I get this teacher from? But he'd walk away.
So caring for patients with or relatives with dementia would be something that would be important to you.
Oh yeah, I'm a very strong advocate for allowing them to age in place.
Yes,
but using a quality daycare. I found one that I went for that one. They closed out the use of the Y, and then they moved to a church, and then finally I found one out in University City, and
so respite for the caretaker.
Yeah, because you qualify for at that time. City block grants were being used. If you needed assistance and you had Alzheimer's, you went to the top of the list for ability to qualify for in-home services, for bus transportation, and they pay for the daycare. So we, at that point, the block grants covered everything. We got somebody come in, well, not for Dad. This was when Mama signed up for it. When I got home, Dad was at the final stages, and I didn't know about the block grants or anything like that. So we were paying for somebody to come in and help us bathe them.
So accessing resources.
Accessing resources was a big deal. Access.
So tell me, what would you pass on to your children, your grandchildren, or other people that you see as important to keep working on today? To keep working toward?
Well, when I'm passing on to my grandkids, first of all, you gotta because your job is getting your education. You've got that is your raison d'etre.
Yes.
For from K-12, get an education, get everything you can out of that. Decide what you want to do. You can change your mind, because I'm like, I changed my mind. But the point is, get on a road. The road can switch, but get on a road. Find out what you're good at. Find out what you love. If they may not be the same things. You may be good at one thing, but you might love something else. But just do that self-discovery.
I love that. I love that information. So, how would you like yourself and your family to be remembered?
For what we contributed. What did I think my congresswoman says community service is your debt you pay for living or something. I don't know how she says it, but she says it very well. What are you going to do to make the world better?
Yes, ma'am. Got that. And my last question is there anything else you'd like to add?
There are so many things about my family, that you can't encapsulate everything that
Yes.
you grew up in and learned from your parents. One of the things that my dad and I loved were dogs. My mother was deathly afraid of dogs. So when I was growing up, we always had a dog, because Daddy had a dog. Daddy had a dog before Mama says, when I was in Rocky Mountain, she was going down the street with me in a stroller, and this burly, big old, ugly looking dog came up to her. She was petrified. she was ready to, and the dog came up to me, and I'm in the stroller, and I reached out and grabbed him by both ears and gave him a big hug, and she was about ready to run in the other bed. I'll leave you with the kid, I'm leaving. I've always loved dogs, and dogs always love me. And so we've always had a dog. And where we lived in Charlotte, when we moved there, we were outside the city limits. So the bus turned around and went back the other way about 4 blocks away before we ever got to my house. And the streets were tar and gravel. Well, the dog and I would play in the street. And then all the neighbors knew when you turned to come into St. Mark's, slow down, because Peach might be in the middle of the street, or the dog might be in the street, or both of them might be in the street. Well, one of the neighbors didn't pay attention. They hit the dog and killed him. And the neighbors were, that neighbor was on everybody's dog food list for a while. They forgave her, but when we got another dog. But we went to Rocky Mount, and Dad found this 6-month-old collie and brought her home. And that was my dog. And her name was Fritzy. And Fritzy, we didn't know about spaying dogs back then. Fritzy would have pups about every 6 months. And I loved Fritzy. And we did. Mom and Dad used to have chickens in the backyard. Well, they found out the ground was not good for the chickens. So the fence was there for the chickens. So that became the dog's fence. They built a doghouse. I was always in the doghouse. Mama would be, I tell you, Mama was nice, nasty. She would scrub me until I would tell her, I'm so clean, I itch. She's trying to get all the fleas and everything else off of me. I was a child of the outdoors.
Yes.
I was in the neighborhood. It wasn't just the neighbors who was out. I was in every field trying to catch rabbits and squirrels and anything else I could get my hands on except snakes. I was up everybody's tree. I was just, that was my world, the whole community of people, as well as the woods and everything. I ran away from home when I was 2, but I wasn't running away. The preacher across the street had a dog. That was before I had Fritzy. The dog and I were best friends. The dog was going down the street, so he and I were going to go down the street together. I'm 2. And he went down the street, down the hill, up the other side of the hill. After you went that far, there was nothing but woods. So the dog, when I were going on, by this time the neighbors would realize I'm missing, and they're all out looking for me. And I remember the dog and I were walking down the street, and he went up. The street was here, but the sides of the street went up kind of a hill, and he went up this side of the hill and was up here on the hill, and I was down on the street because I couldn't get to him. So I started crying because he wouldn't come down and I couldn't come up, and that's how they found me, because they heard me crying. Well, I got my hide tanned for walking, but everybody was happy that they found me.
So you still have a love for animals.
Oh yeah, I wondered when I was searching all of these pictures, I found pictures of my 2 favorite dogs. When we were overseas, I told you my daughter was born overseas. I wanted a collie because Fritzy was a collie. She wasn't a full collie, but she was a collie. Let me finish the story about Fritzy first. We brought Fritzy home from Rocky Mount, and she was my dog. And she would have pups. And I would be in the doghouse with her and the pups. It was a big enough doghouse I could get physically into it. And she would let me, because she knew me. I would be playing with her and the puppies. And one day she had this one particular litter, and I was so proud of her. And we had rags and things in there. So I got the puppy. He was about to use my hand, and I covered him up with rags and everything. And I went down the neighborhood showing everybody what the new puppy was. And the last house I got to she said, "Baby, the puppy's dead." Really? I didn't know he couldn't leave his mama. That or maybe I mishandled him. Anyway, I had him too long away from her, and he died. But anyway, and when the puppies were ready to be weaned, I would have to interview people as to whether or not if I was willing to let you have one of my puppies. So now I'm in the first grade, and I love my first grade teacher. Oh, she is just fantastic. She loved me too. It was love. So I asked her if she wanted a puppy, and she said, "Oh yes, I would love puppies." I gave her one of my puppies. And of course, now the puppy has been used to being at home with his siblings, and now he is at her house, and so he's crying. And she's such a sweet lady. She kept saying, "Hush, puppy, hush, puppy." The dog thought his name was Hush Puppy. She didn't give him a real name until he was about 6 years old, but she kept that dog until it died.
Wonderful.
Yeah.